Okay, so hopefully everybody that's here except Sue, who just wandered off anyway, got a worksheet from last week, and if you didn't get one, they're on the table back there. So we talked last week about the ideas that Paul puts out in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where he talks about making himself a slave to everyone in order to win some for the gospel. And that the idea was that he didn't just go do whatever those people were doing. He didn't make himself no longer under the gospel in order to reach out to the Jews, or go and do evil things in order to reach out to the Gentiles, or that kind of thing. But rather that he chose to meet people where they were and to speak to them based on what they did understand and based on where they were thinking from things, and to show them compassion where they were at, in order to give them to have a place to start a conversation from, to talk about the gospel and to reach out to them and those kinds of things. And so when we look at spreading the gospel, one of the keys to spreading the gospel is being able to reach people where they are and not expect them to elevate themselves up to us. And I think one of the struggles, we didn't talk about this last week, but an observation that I have made historically is that one of the struggles we've had in the churches of Christ is that because the churches of Christ initially were an outgrowth of existing Protestant movements and those kinds of things, and they were a reaction to that basically was saying, look, we've built all these structures and all of these doctrines on top of the Bible, let's go back to the basics of the Bible and let's understand those. That rather than necessarily developing an evangelical model of reaching out to people who didn't really have the gospel at all, the model that the churches of Christ developed was reaching out to those other denominations and to those groups that had those doctrines and those layers of additional teachings, and trying to show them, here's what the gospel really says, here's what the Bible really is. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It isn't supposed to involve all these other things, and because of that, this is where you really want to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. Don't misunderstand me. That is an important part of teaching the gospel. But if your model is primarily based around, okay, you already basically know the central things, here's what you're missing. That's a very different conversation than having a conversation with someone that starts from, they don't even know the gospel at all, or they don't have any relationship with the Bible at all. And so we have struggled, I think, historically to integrate the idea of how do we reach out to the people who are unchurched, the people who don't have any background, and even with respect to the people who do, as society move further away from the, make a good argument and maybe I'll buy into it model, into the how do I feel about what you're saying model, we've also struggled to reach out to people who were in other denominations and other groups and stuff like that, because we're no longer appealing to what they're interested in listening to. And so the church has struggled to some extent to adapt that. And I think in more recent years we've become better at that, but the churches of Christ have been have had a difficult time with some of that stuff, and have not necessarily been, one of our strengths, I don't think that anybody can really argue too hard with this, one of our strengths has not been reaching out to the unchurched and getting them in. Our tendency is to go find people who look like us and convince them to come to church with us, and there's nothing wrong with that, but again, that's not the whole picture that the gospel is, and that Paul and Jesus are putting in front of us. So we want to look for ways not just to reach out to people who are like us and who are close to us anyway. We can say, okay, well, you've got almost everything you need to know. Here's a couple of things and let's do this. We want to be able to reach out to people who don't know much of anything about what we're teaching and who don't have any of the same kinds of backgrounds that we do, and still be effective in reaching out to them, and that's more challenging. Okay, so today we're going to take a look at a series, or a movie, and we're going to look at this probably the next several weeks here, because this one is a really interesting movie. We talked a little bit about it last week at the end of the day, the end of the class. Catch Me If You Can. It's a movie. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. Leonardo DiCaprio plays this confidence man, check fraud. I forget what the term is exactly. Check kiter, I think, is the term that's sometimes used. Who ultimately, over the course of his career, rang up millions of dollars in bad checks, taking advantage of banks and airlines and all sorts of people like that. Tom Hanks plays an FBI agent who is investigating him and trying to catch him. And so this movie follows him from when he's quite young, because he actually started on his career when he was 16 or 17 years old, is when he first started to do some of this stuff. And so it follows him from when he's quite young all the way through when he actually gets captured and put in prison, and then later actually goes to work for the FBI. And if you haven't seen the movie, I apologize, but it is 20 years old, so I feel like I'm not necessarily really ruining any spoilers for anybody. And you need a little bit of foundation because we're not going to be watching the whole movie, we're just going to be watching bits and pieces of it. So there's a number of themes that we're going to see in here that I think we can definitely see reflections of biblical concepts. And as I've said with every other one we looked at, it doesn't mean that these are perfect reflection by any means, but it's conversation starters. And a surprising number of people from their 30s onward at least are familiar with this movie, and even some of my high school students are familiar with this movie when I ask them about it. So it has a fairly high level of penetration into the social consciousness and stuff like that, and some of the ideas in it are certainly things that people are aware of. But the core idea of this movie, and I think this is the critical thing to get a hold of here, is we have a guy who makes it his job to go around lying about who he is and what he is in order to take advantage of people and to get stuff from them. And you have another guy who is exactly who he says he is and exactly what he says he is, who makes it his job to try to catch this guy. And so when you understand those two things, you start to see some places right off the bat where we can start to see some scriptural or spiritual concepts kind of coming out. So we're going to start off with sort of the first steps. We're going to take a look at where some of the initial things that happened to Frank Abagnale take place that help to shape the way that he thinks and the way that he behaves. And so one of the things we see early on is his father has a very antagonistic relationship with the government. His father runs a business. He's been engaging in widespread tax fraud by not paying employee withholding taxes and things like that. The government, the IRS, begins to investigate him, and ultimately, because he can't get loans to keep running his business, his family has to move. When they have to move, Frank Abagnale, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, begins to have to go to school at a different school than the one he began at, and he has to wear a uniform which he doesn't like, and he's starting his school in high school, with a bunch of different kids. And as any of you who've gone through that or had kids who've gone through that know, that's a very awkward place to be. And so this is actually his first day of school in that new school.
See that? It's just a school. No different than Westburn.
Mom, you said you were going to quit.
Frankie, you don't have to wear the uniform here. Why don't you take off your jacket?
I'm used to it. Excuse me.
Oh, yes?
Do you know room 17 French is?
Yes.
Encyclopedias? It looks like
Quiet down, people! My name is Mr. Abagnale. That's Abagnale, not Abagnale, not Abagnale, but Abagnale. Will somebody please tell me where you left off in your textbooks? Excuse me, people, if I need to ask again, I'm going to write up the entire class. Take your seats!
Chapter 7.
Will you please open your textbooks to chapter 8, and we'll get started? Excuse me, what's your name?
Brad.
Right, why don't you get up here, in front of the class here, and read conversation number 5.
Liz Frances son Generaliment. Donsler pays Q, press Q, toot Le Monde, set impression.
They sent for me. They said they needed a sub for Roberta. I came all the way from Dixon.
I always sub for Roberta. Excuse me, why aren't you reading?
He wills.
I'll never come back to Bellevue Jefferson again. You tell them not to call me. What do you think? It's easy for a woman my age and all the money that it costs to travel.
Okay, so it's no wonder actually that the teacher in the class is laughing at this, because if you've, how many of you have ever taught as a substitute teacher at a high school level? Okay, so I've got a couple of, okay, I've got 3 of you actually that have done that. So this is not as far-fetched as it seems, in the sense, obviously, it would be unusual for a student to do this, but in terms of how you interact with a class, that's a pretty effective way of interacting with a class as a substitute teacher to get them to do what you want them to do. So it's funny because we know he's just a kid who's not supposed to be teaching at all, but at the same time, when you see this taking place, it's kind of interesting. And actually, I forgot, I skipped over this, and I apologize. Actually, I really need to go back to this. I'm sorry. I jumped out of this too soon. There's something else we need to actually see in this, because otherwise, it doesn't actually get the whole thing here. So let me go back in here, see if I can get this where it needs to be. Maybe not. I can make this do what I want it to do. We'll see. I knew I was forgetting something, and now I know what. Let's try this again. All right. Oh, that's not going to work. You would think there would be a way to make it jump forward. But it doesn't seem to be the case. All right, well, I don't want to go back and read the whole thing, so we'll just go, I'll just explain. So basically what ends up happening then is that his parents are called to meet with his principal, because he ends up teaching the class for several weeks because the teacher's gone, and so he just keeps filling in. And nobody really realizes anything's going on until, of course, he's done this for a period of time. And so so he's able to fool the principal, presumably other teachers, and the students as well, into thinking that he is in fact a legitimate substitute teacher. So, and the last thing that we see is as he's actually sent out, well, his parents are talking to the principal. And as they leave, his mother goes out ahead of them, and he and his father begin to walk out, and his father looks out at him and begins to sort of giggle about what he's been doing. And so we see very early on, while he's still quite young, that he is able to manipulate people and to adopt behaviors that convince people that he is someone that he's not. So the first question, I guess, or the first discussion then is, what do you see in this that jumps out at you as being interesting from a moral standpoint, or interesting from a standpoint of human behavior?
False teaching.
Okay, so literally in this case, a false teacher giving false teaching. Okay, what jumps out in terms of the fact that he was able to do that? Is that what made it possible for him to be able to pretend to be a teacher and to convince people that that's what he was?
Being firm, self-assured.
Okay.
This is the job.
Yeah, so the key was that he went in there, and at no point did he deviate from who he was. He adopted this personality, and because he was firm about it, because he was assured about it, and even when somebody else came in who was legitimately there, you notice he didn't stumble around, he didn't get confused or thrown off, he just immediately had an answer, Now, whether he thought of it ahead of time, I mean, he was making the whole thing up from the beginning. It wasn't like he went in there planning to do that. So his ability to rapidly adapt to new situations and bring up, and make things seem plausible, and to not be embarrassed or ashamed or say things that would make it seem like he was, made it possible for him to convince people that he was legitimate. And I think when we think about false teaching, these are some of the things we have to be mindful of with false teaching. Most people that are deliberate false teachers don't seem like they are. I mean, if they did, we wouldn't believe them, you know? They don't seem confused, they seem to have their facts lined up, they seem to have their arguments lined up, and a lot of times they are very shameless about what they do and how they teach. And so we want to be very careful with false teachers that it's not just a matter of saying, well, this person seems legitimate, or this person talks like they know what they're talking about, or whatever. We have to go and we have to look underneath that to see what's really being taught. Sue?
Well, he also put it on them that they better follow him or
Right.
else. So
Yeah.
they were pretty directed to do
Yeah,
that.
so there is coercive elements to what he does. And we're going to see as things go along, he's going to learn the coercive elements don't work as well when you get outside of high school. It's great in high school. If you have the teaching role and you're working with students, you have a degree of power because you can make them, you know, write them all up or whatever it is you're going to do. You can make bad things happen to them. You get outside of high school, it's trickier. You have to find other ways to coerce people or convince people. And so we do encounter false teachers who use coercion, who have power, and they use that power. We certainly find people in positions of authority throughout our society who misuse their power. And sometimes there's not much we can do about that, even when we realize the falseness of what they're teaching, other than try to bring it to other people's attention. But that's only one way that false teachers operate. Jerry?
I was just questioning, why did he dress the way he did? Did he anticipate something? Was there...
No, I think, and I apologize, I got mixed up about that. The school he used to go to was a nicer private type of school, and that's why he was wearing the jacket, because that's what he'd been from. And so even though he was coming to a public school, he continued to wear it. My guess is that he did that thinking that it would impress the other students, that he was dressed up and he had this blazer and he went to a nicer school. My guess also is that he realized very, very quickly that that was not how that was going to work. And so he adapted to the situation. At least that's my anticipation.
The other thought I had is he has a gift, an ability that is very, very strong ability, gift, but he's using it wrong.
Okay. So this is, and this is going to come out over and over again through the movie, that he is very talented and he is very capable of doing a lot of different things, maybe of doing almost anything he wanted to do, because he's very smart and he's very resourceful and he's very, talented. But rather than doing legitimate things, he's going to use it illegitimately over and over again.
Was he the guy that pretended to be a medical doctor?
Yes. Yeah. Among other things, he did. Now, one of the things that's really interesting, as we'll see as we go through the movie, is a lot of what he's taking advantage of is the fact that there are existing systems in place, and he's sort of riding along with those systems. He's not directing them. So, as a high school teacher, does he get up there and try to teach them French? What did he have them do?
Teach.
He had a kid read from the book.
Yeah.
So he's using the existing systems of the class. Where are you in the book? Because he knows that's how schools work, and make the kids read. And so for a few weeks at least, you could pull that off. I mean, you would be astonished at just how incompetent some of the substitute teachers are that come into our schools and teach. I know, because I've seen what they did with the lessons I left for them. It's astonishing how many of them come to school expecting to basically just sit and look at their phone and not do anything for the entire class period. And there are many who don't misunderstand. There's a lot of substitute teachers who are very good. I felt like I was pretty good when I was a substitute teacher, but some of them at least don't make any effort. And so somebody who comes in and acts like they're making an effort, who's going to look twice? Who's going to complain about that? When they're a substitute. Now, if he was the actual teacher, it would become obvious a little quicker, I think, that he didn't know what he was doing because he couldn't create curriculum, which is part of what being a teacher is about. But he's using the existing system, and as we'll see with some of the other things that he does, he continues to use the existing systems rather than do things that might be, either obviously show that he didn't know what he was doing or put people's lives in jeopardy. To his credit, he doesn't actually try to operate on somebody who's a doctor or something like that. So
There's a saying that is pretty prevalent in Payson, is it's easier to give forgiveness than it is approval. And that seems to be an attitude that he is going for.
There's an element of that, sure. Mark?
I was gonna say, he's taking advantage of that situation, just like a false teacher would do with people who don't know the gospel, don't know the Bible. So if a guy sounds assertive, it sounds like he knows what he's talking about. These people who have no knowledge of it would say, yeah, he must know.
Yeah.
He must know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Without even, and that's part of the problem about some of the different denominations. They don't even crack the Bible. They're just going by what somebody said. And so, you just
don't even
build on that.
You don't even just have to get straight into Christian religions.
Right.
You can look at whether it's somebody like Osama bin Laden, who was recognized as a teacher of Islam, but the majority of people never look at the books long enough to go, well, this seems pretty, this doesn't line up. You can get in almost any place where belief or trust is a big element of why people follow you. There are always going to be some people who don't know anything about the stuff, and they'll just listen to you because you seem like you got a good idea. It's true in religion, it's true in politics, it's true in school, unfortunately, it's true in almost any endeavor. If you sound like you know what you're doing, at least some people are going to listen to you without ever looking to see if you know what you're talking about, Jared.
Paul warns us about that in the church when he says, try the Spirit.
Yeah.
He recognizes that that's possible in the church.
Yeah. Peter and John both in their letters talk about the danger of false teachers and how we need to test them and how we need to understand what they're doing, and how one of the characteristics Peter in particular gives to false teachers, he says basically they're empty shells. I'm paraphrasing what he says. They're empty shells. They're wind without any weather behind it. They're this facade that sounds good, but behind it there really isn't anything true, there isn't anything good. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Is he's a facade. He has a facade of knowing how to make it look like he's a teacher without actually having the abilities or the skills or any of that kind of stuff, but long enough to get away with it in how he interacts with people for a period of time. And as we'll see, probably we'll have time to see the next couple of clips before the end of the day today, as you'll see, as he moves outside of the scholastic environment, that trend continues, that ability to create a facade that is temporarily effective, long enough for him to get what he wants and move on, which is the hallmark of most con men. Most con men do not stand up to rigorous scrutiny, and they don't stay in one place for very long, because if they did, they'd get caught. They take advantage of people using that facade, they get what they can, and then they move on to the next con. So.
Well, part of this all started because he realized that he didn't look quite right, he was getting ripped for that. He also understood the bullies and knew that's why he dragged him up to do the reading, because he expected him to fail.
Right. And now, an interesting side note though is this. So he gets away with this for 3 weeks or so. What's going to happen at the end of those 3 weeks?
He's going to get beaten up.
Exactly, right? Because
effectively, yes, and this doesn't have a whole lot to do with class, I guess, but what his intent was, just by seeing this little clip, was to destroy the bully's reputation, which he did in about 2 seconds.
Okay.
So at the end of 3 weeks, may not be that big a deal, because the jock has been destroyed.
Maybe he's undermined the threat, and that could be true. On the other hand, there's a real possibility that now he has to go back to the class that he's been impersonating a teacher for, and has to try to deal with the fact that all these students now that know that he's not a teacher. So one of the aspects of this is that there's not necessarily any significant amount of planning that goes into this. He does something in the moment, and it works, and he rides it as long as he can, but at the end of that, there's consequences. And so one of the things that when we look at this guy over and over again, what we're going to see is there's 2 layers to this. There's the layer of the false teacher element of it. He's the guy doing bad things. There's also the layer of he's the human being making bad mistakes that we make all the time in the way that we judge, in the way that we think, in the choices that we make. And the consequences of his behavior, while it's mitigated, like I said, he's never going to actually try to fly an airplane. He's never going to actually try to operate on somebody who's sick. That doesn't mean that there aren't consequences for the people around him, because who in this particular clip had a bad consequence? Well, the bully did, that's true. I don't feel as bad for him, frankly. I mean, I guess I should a little bit. But the actual legitimate substitute. she, number one, she was inconvenienced and caused problems for him coming there, but it also soured her relationship with the school, and it's unlikely that got repaired just because they figured out later on that he was teaching when she was supposed to be doing it. So that's bad for her, and if you know anything about how hard it is for schools to get substitutes, it's probably bad for the school as well. So it's not as though his actions have no consequences. And he's going to go about robbing, basically defrauding banks and institutions like that, rather than trying to steal money from individual checking accounts or something like that. And so he can tell himself, I'm not really hurting real people, I'm just hurting, banks, they have insurance, everything's fine. But we all know, or at least we ought to know, that those things do have consequences. You can't take $1 million out of the system without it affecting everybody, because the prices get raised, rates go up, things happen to compensate for that. And so his actions have consequences for other people, and they have consequences for him as well.
But he takes advantage of opportunities too, because he had no idea that there was no teacher that day.
Right.
So I mean, the teacher could have been waiting to come in. He was lucky in the opportunity that he took advantage of.
And so there's an element of opportunism coupled with I don't know if you call it luck or what exactly. He tended to make his own luck to a certain extent.
The gift of gab.
What's that?
The gift of gab.
The gift of gab. The gift of and the gift of being able to spot a situation, quickly recognize what's going on, and adapt to that. That's something that not all of us have. In fact, not a lot of us have it to that extent. Some of us have the gift of gab, and we're not as quick on the uptake as he is. Some of us can figure things out, but we would never dare to try to pretend to be somebody we're not. And so it's rare to find that combination, which is why con men are oftentimes so successful, because the average person is just not equipped to deal with that kind of thing. We don't think in those terms, we don't react in those terms, and it would not occur to us that someone would be crazy enough to try something like that, So these things are all of these things are tools in his tool bag, manipulating people and the ability to take advantage of situations. Okay, so let's move on. So then we have, this was just an early thing. This is while things are still reasonably okay in his life, because his dad is kind of hiding the reality of their financial situation. But as the movie progresses, the situation in the family becomes increasingly dire. His father is increasingly in trouble with the IRS, and economically they're doing poorly. And so what happens ultimately is that his parents split up. And this is the point that sort of catalyzes him, and moving from just sort of tinkering around with a system here or there to moving out on his own and having to find a way to make his own way. So,
You don't have to be scared. I'm right here, Frank. I don't always agree. But there are laws. Everything in this country has to be legal. So what we need is make some decisions.
oh, sorry,
That's what
that's
the
not the way
business
it's
is.
Many times these decisions are left up to the courts, but that can be very expensive for people fighting over their children.
Nobody's fighting. You get me, Frank? Nobody's fighting.
Mais ça, c'est les candidats que je t'ai donné quand t'es marié. Je te les ai donnés quand tu t'es marié, je les prends et quand tu
Except
t'es
for-
marié. Je les reprends.
No, c'est pas vrai.
Je les reprends.
Do you remember your grandma? F. Shiraki's money.
Tu avais vendu perdu. Que tu dis. Moi, je me souviens que tu si petit.
Do you understand what we are saying to you, Frank? Your father and I are getting a divorce.
Ne t'inquiète pas, je suis là.
Nothing's going to change. We're still going to see each other.
Stop it, please, Frank, don't interrupt.
Frank, you don't have to read all of this. Most of it's for your parents' boring adult business. But this paragraph right here, this is important because it states who you are going to live with after the divorce, whose custody he will be in.
And there's a blank space right here.
Elle dit, bon, qu'est-ce qu'il va
I
pas
want you to go in the kitchen, sit at the table, put a name down. You can take as long as you want, but when you come back into this room, I want to see a name on that line.
Frank, just write down my name. This won't be over. It's going to be okay.
And what name? Your mother or your father. Just put the name there. It's as simple as that. And don't look so scared. It's not a test. There's no wrong answer.
One ticket to Grand Central, please.
That'll be $3.50, sir.
things, we skipped over this. One of these earlier in the movie, he's introduced to us. His dad sets up a checking account for him and puts some money into it, so he learns the value of writing checks, or the usefulness of writing checks. And he doesn't write any bad checks initially, at least, and I don't think this one either was a bad check, but obviously that's going to change. So, all right, so what is it that sort of catalyzes his situation, transforming it from a kid who almost kind of played an elaborate prank to something that's going to get a lot more serious?
Trauma.
Trauma, okay, in this case the trauma is specifically what? The divorce of his parents. And it's not just that his parents are getting divorced. What ends up getting thrown in his lap?
You gotta pick.
You gotta pick, yeah, right? So his parents are making it his job to make this decision. Now, this is set, I believe, let me think, this is probably set in the 48 plus 17.
55 Plymouth.
What's that? Okay, so yeah, so this is probably set in the mid-60s would be my guess, because I believe later on we're going to see his date of birth is 1948. So if you add 17 onto that, you have 1965, something like that. So the mid to late 60s and early 70s is where this movie is mostly set. So this is not unheard of during this period of time. For somebody who's 17 years old, 16 or 17 years old, it would not be unheard of for him to be asked to decide which parent he's going to live with. And certainly even today, minors who are 15 or older are, their view on this is taken into consideration when decisions are made about custody. However, these days we don't just give them a paper and say, write in the name of the person you want to live with. We have a psychologist sit down with them and have a discussion in a kind of indirect way that doesn't make it clear to them that what they're saying is going to have this huge impact on them, because we know that's the sort of thing that really messes kids up when you're forced to make a choice like that. What are you essentially, if we distill this down, what are they forcing him to do?
Pick sides.
Pick sides, that's true, but even more basic than that, what are they asking him to do that they don't want to do? Yeah, they're asking him to make an adult decision when they're not willing to make it themselves. You could say, well, they're trying to do what he wants and what he thinks, but trust me, I've seen the rest of the movie. That's not what they're doing. They're doing this because neither one of them is really capable of making the kind of adult decision and making a hard choice the way that is necessary for the situation. And so they put it on him because it's easier than having to do it themselves, and because it takes away the accountability from themselves. It's not, we didn't do this, we didn't make this decision, he made the decision, and so it's not my fault. That's the mindset that comes out of this. So what's his reaction? He runs away. And I mean, literally in this case, he runs away. He is going to, from this point on, he's going to basically live on his own, apart from his parents, for the rest of the movie. And so they kind of got what they deserved for what they were asking. They said, you make the adult decision. And he said, okay, I'm going to go make an adult decision. I'm going to go be an adult, And so the things that we ask for sometimes we get in ways we don't expect to get them. So what is the underlying problem here when we talk about it from a Christian perspective? What is the problem with what we just saw? What's the core issue? Nobody wants to say it, or else nobody's figured it out yet. The core problem here is this breakdown of this relationship. It is this divorce. That's what drives this problem. So his parents, his mom is from France. His dad, I guess, met her while he was serving in World War II over in France. Or actually, yeah, based on his date of birth, that's probably true. And so they're not, we don't have the foundation for this, but if you watch the movie and you pay attention to the movie, it's pretty clear. His dad is kind of a dreamer who doesn't necessarily have really strong roots in how to be a good person and make hard decisions when things are difficult. He kind of does whatever the situation wants. And his mom is kind of the same way. She's kind of a dreamer who, fell in love with his father because he was handsome in his uniform, and never really thought about what it would mean to go away from her family and her past and everything else and move to the United States. And really, you hear her say it in there that this nation is law, everybody has to follow the laws here, as though that's an abnormal way for things to be, Wow, who would have thought you'd have to follow the laws, there'd actually be rules for things. But so there's there's a sense of the two of them are together because things are good at the time that they get together, and in the aftermath of World War, things are really good financially. But you get into the 60s, we started getting into a recession, things start going wrong, and now, when everything isn't perfect, that relationship isn't really built on a stable foundation, and the people in it don't have the strength of character to make it work through that difficult time.
I agree the divorce is an issue, but truly I think the bigger picture, I'm watching the whole movie, I've seen it, is just materialistic things.
Yes.
Because the mom is very materialistic, the dad is too, trying to provide for that, and then obviously he becomes that way.
Yes,
So.
you're absolutely right. Materialism is part of the reason that falls apart for them, because when the dad can no longer support the mom, there's nothing really there for their relationship anymore, because it was about that materialism aspect as well. So I think it's a very good point, and one that I kind of glossed over, but you're right. We won't see a lot of that directly, but Frank Abagnale's behavior is going to be all about getting stuff and wanting to stay in nice hotels and wanting to have nice things and wanting to take advantage of people in order to fund that kind of a lifestyle. So materialism is an issue. In the immediate sense, what drives him out of the house is this divorce. And it's also important to realize, and again, we had to skip over some of this, he's gotten very little direction from his parents in terms of developing a moral character or a moral center for himself, other than materialism, other than nice things are nice and we want to have nice things, you know? So he doesn't really have a father who's modeled for him what it means to have a good character, what it means to persevere through difficulty, you know, to do things in an honest kind of way. His mother, she gives him money to make him, you know, feel better, basically. And she's very kind of, you know, flighty about those kinds of things. And so he's not got any sort of a foundation. And so when they split up and he starts making his own decisions, he doesn't have anything to fall back on that would help him to make good decisions. And so instead what he starts to make is bad decisions with long-term bad consequences that he has to deal with. So this is where he's at when he leaves home. Now what happens to him is, initially at least, he's able to write checks and get away with that, but pretty soon they start going bad, and so the hotel he's staying at, after a couple of his checks get returned, kicks him out. And so he ends up kind of in this tenement situation, thinking to himself, we're going to go ahead and watch this clip, we're not going to have much time to talk about it, but this is kind of a bridge that I need you to see more than it is something about where we're going to really necessarily need to talk about it a lot. But I want you to watch this scene and see. So the problem he's having is he needs a way to get people to give him money, and he's looking for something that would make that happen. So this is where he gets a little insight.
Sorry, but we're not allowed to cash checks from other banks. How would we know if they were any good?
What did they say? Sweet Ashley, I found on the sidewalk out there. What's this slip right off your neck?
Is there something I can help you with, son?
Well, you see, it's my grandmother's birthday next week, and I want to get her something extra special. Please, I think it's my midterm next week, and my books was home. Please, it's just $5. Dora would have to go.
I'm sorry, but we are not allowed to take checks from people we don't know.
Practice afternoon. Here. You betcha. You big pilot? There you go. We're going to school.
All right, so he can't get anybody to take his checks because they don't know him and because at the time there was no way to confirm the validity of a check the way that we have today, and even today there's still some serious drawbacks to the system. So what does he see that gives him a different idea? And we're going to see how that works out later, but what does he see? What realization does he have?
You gotta look the part.
Okay, you gotta look the part,
Yeah,
okay? Now remember, part of what worked for him in the school when he pretended to be a substitute teacher was the fact that he had the jacket on, that he looked like he didn't belong, but that he was official in some way. So what he sees here is someone who looks official, and how do people treat pilots? Georgia.
You're almost right, State.
Yeah, I was one over, but yeah, sorry.
Well, as I was watching that, and I was reading through the scriptures here in 1 Corinthians 9 on 22, where it says that he became, to a man, became weak, and to who they needed him to be. He became all things to all men, and that's what this brought to my attention when I was watching it, whatever the situation called for.
Okay. So one of the things that we're going to see here, and it's kind of an interesting point, I really thought about it this way, but it's a really good point, Georgia, is that the devil and the people who work for him are very good at appealing to all groups of people. That's why we sometimes are afraid of that, is because we don't want to think of ourselves as con men or as doing something dishonest, and we have to be careful not to be dishonest. But Satan and the people who are doing evil things are very good at changing themselves to be what people want to see. And in this case, what does he see? What does he see that he wants to be? Not because he really wants to be it, but because he wants the authority and the adoration that comes with it. He's a pilot, okay? And during this period of time, pilots were very, very highly regarded. Even today they are. It's just that we have a sort of different relationship with them today because the airline industry itself is not viewed nearly as favorably. But the notion of flying a jet and the responsibility that came with it, most of them were former military men, even are today. This brought a lot of respect. It brought a lot of confidence. And so he sees this and says, that's something I can use. And so that's the thought process. And we'll explore more about this next Sunday, obviously, as we see him try to adopt that persona. But the notion of looking for a vulnerability by taking advantage of what we assume to be safe or we assume to be reliable is very much something that we see happening with false teachers on a regular basis. Most false teachers don't simply come in from a position of weakness. Most false teachers who come in meaning to teach false things do it by trying to come from a position of things that we trust or people that we want to rely on, and that makes it way easier for them to get us on board with what they're teaching. But we'll talk more about that next week because we are out of time. So let's take a break. We'll come back at 10:30 and we'll get started with our worship.